I'd like to welcome everybody to the EPM Empower Hour Live. We have a very amazing guest here that I personally know, respect immensely, and learned a lot from. I'll get into that in a little bit, but welcome Brian Stoffers to us. Just to give you a little bit of background, he is the global president for CBRE. It was really cool when I was in Spain because, what we do in our industry, we just see in America. But then all of a sudden, when I was in Spain a couple of years ago, I saw CBRE that he heads line up. I think the real cool thing is how many individuals he's grown. It's a little over 160 originators have done over 230 billion since 2007. That shows not only immense leadership, but that always shows that somebody that cares and appreciates others. And I personally know, because you guys understand the journey I went on being MORPAC chairman from 2019, 2020. So we owe this gentleman a great debt of gratitude. I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from Chris George, both of them that were MBA chairmen, because they're the ones that picked me. So that obviously, like anything else, when we talk about our culture and our mission of freedom through empowerment, we always have to talk about those that believed in us and put us on the next stage. So this is a gentleman who truly did impact everybody on this call in the industry, because MORPAC chairman, even though a lot of people thought I was crazy for it, I had one of the greatest times in my life because I got to know so many people. I got to meet so many different people, and I got to ask people for support. But I think the coolest part about Brian was I always ask people, where were you March 9th, 2020, when the music stopped? Well, I was with Brian. I was with everybody else. And that's when he was MBA chairman. You want to talk about being in the heat of the battle. You want to talk about when businesses are shutting down, everything of that nature. That is one of the people, and there was a collection of it, don't get me wrong, but he literally was at the forefront, at the table, treasury, government, everything of that nature. The Mark, last name I'm not going to pronounce, head of FHFA in this industry, dealing with him too. So
Calabria. His name was Calabria.
Yeah, all right. You'll say it. It's one of those names to be unspoken about. But yeah, these are a lot of the people, when you're talking about the 50 bips that almost went into effect, he's one of the ones that helped drive that. So, I think everybody should listen to this. His information is powerful, but also from me to you, Brian, for everybody in my organization, and obviously for the industry in its whole. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for how you've always shown the way. And more importantly, thank you for what you did to me. I think you need to know that. I greatly appreciate it. My team greatly appreciates it, because I've always given credit where credit's due. And even my own growth as a leader has come from just the influence in you guys. So without further ado, everybody, thank you for being here, Brian. And please give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Hey, right back at you, Eddie. You did a wonderful job as MORPAC chairman. That's the toughest job in the MBA. We've said that for years. And you were a great steward of that campaign for 2 years in a row. So thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Philly, it's you, man. It's you and Brian now, buddy.
Here we go. What more can I say? So this is not going to be a cream puff piece, right? I'm going to get to the hard-hitting questions right off the bat. Now, folks, Brian's specialization is sort of commercial, right? So we're going to talk a lot about the interplay between residential and commercial, but we also want to talk about the greater markets as well and the economy at large, because it's sort of a top of mind thing. One of the things that folks have been talking about over the last 30, 60, 90 days is what's happening to interest rates, what's happening to the refi boom, so-called refi boom. When is it going to end? How is that going to impact us? So before we get into that, Brian, here's a body blow regarding commercial real estate. With the advent of Zoom calling, video teleconferencing, things of that nature, remote working, some folks are saying, wow, what's going to happen to commercial real estate? So we're going to start off with the hard-hitting question. What's your prognosis on commercial real estate? Bull, bear, somewhere in between? Your thoughts on that?
That's a great opening salvo, Phil. It really depends on what sector you're in and where you're in it. I can go on for a long time, and I'll dig into that here a little bit. But if you're in the multifamily or the industrial sector, also known as sheds in Europe or logistics, those areas have done extraordinarily well. The values of warehouses have gone up tremendously in the last year because of this whole transformation from the retail experience to buying online. And you think about the logistics that are involved in getting you that Amazon package every day or 3 times a week, whatever it is.
No, every day. If you live in my house, it is every day.
Yeah. I've heard lots of funny stories about the package delivery service and how sometimes they're seen more than the spouses or significant others, right? So, but in any event, the logistics have done really well. I'll just give you some anecdotes. The value of industrial land has gone up 2 to 3 times in the last 18 months. 2 or 3x. Rents have skyrocketed. There have been more million-square-foot buildings leased and sold than ever in history. It's become a global asset class that investors all over the world are looking to buy. So that business has gone through the roof. I would say that the multifamily business has held in very, very well for the most part. We've seen a lot of tenants being given forgiveness, if you will, much like we call forbearance for single family lending, if they've been affected directly by COVID. And thankfully, the rental relief measures taken by Congress have helped them continue paying rent. I will tell you that that number is declining virtually every month, but there's still enough equity gap between the mortgage and the value of the property that we're not seeing massive foreclosures or delinquencies in the multifamily area. In many markets, the cap rates, which determine value, have actually gone down. Cap rates go down, values increase. So we've seen the price of apartments increase by and large. Now, what has been affected negatively is urban apartments. So if you're in a San Francisco or a New York City, because so many people in those markets are working remotely, a lot of them have given up their leases. And so there's been some stress in some of those urban markets. Moving down the food chain, retail has taken it on its chin. And frankly, retail was being affected negatively before the pandemic because of this whole movement to e-commerce. But we've seen that accelerate those retail trends. Having said that, we know of a multitude of big box retailers and grocers that are actually doing volumes that are exceeding sales volumes exceeding pre-pandemic levels. So it's not a universal situation. B grade malls, C grade malls, even A grade malls, all suffering immensely. But some of these big grocery anchored or power centers are doing quite well. And then you step down into lodging, and lodging has probably been hit the hardest of all the product categories. But that is also a tale of two cities. Convention hotels, big corporate markets, again, like New York or San Francisco, they've been suffering greatly. But some of the motor lodges that are in between cities, and some of the staycation destinations have done quite well. So I live between Houston and Vail, Colorado. And in June, we decided to fly back. I was going to work out of my office there for the month of June. And we decided, when COVID really started peaking again, to drive back from Houston to Colorado. And so the halfway point is roughly Amarillo, Texas. And any of you from Amarillo, I don't mean to speak negatively about it, but it's not one of the cities that you would call a destination city. It's a transit city. And so we pull into, I think it was a Marriott branded Fairfield Inn or something of that nature. And since I travel so much, I traditionally pre-pandemic would travel over 300,000 miles a year and spent many, many nights in hotel rooms. And so I have a big status with a lot of the different brands, including Marriott. So I walk in and they greet me and thank me for my titanium, whatever it is, status. And they start fumbling around at the computer, and I'm standing there with my wife. And long story short, they come back to me and said, Mr. Stoffers, you actually canceled your reservation this morning. And I said, well, absolutely not. I was on the road, and how'd that happen?
I'm here.
So long story short, I had made reservations on Thursday evening instead of Friday evening. And so I said, well, you must have a room. And they said, no, we're completely sold out, as was the adjoining Marriott branded hotel. Point being is these transit hotels, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were sold out, even in the midst of the pandemic. So when I'm talking about lodging and hotels, it really is a tale of two cities there too, where convention hotels suffered greatly, the motor lodges and some of the staycation destinations did okay. So that's the spectrum.
So let's talk about that. By the way, I should say as a disclaimer, if there's anybody watching from Marriott, the views expressed by Mr. Stoffers are not necessarily the views expressed by EPM. No, just kidding. So you used a few words there: transformation, staycation, right? Some buzzwords for me. One of the things that we talked about here when COVID struck in March, and that sort of liquidity crisis in March and April and May in the residential and really all credit sectors, but for us specifically residential. A couple things that we talked about was one, a rotation, right? And the sense early on that we felt like the recovery was going to be V-shaped. Some folks are getting a little fancy saying that it's K-shaped because maybe certain sectors are being left out. You're touching on something here, though, that to me is really interesting, which is there aren't all winners or all losers, right? What's happened is there's a rotation, if you will, of money away from certain sectors into other sectors. And I think that that's an interesting case study in the world economies. We talk a lot about inflation because it's tied to interest rates. And one of the reasons why we've been big bond bulls is the rotation of money over the last couple of decades is really not inflation friendly, and thus has suppressed rates. You see what's happening in Japan. I mean, just permanently 0% low interest rates sort of happening in Germany now. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the impact of that rotation of money, of wealth, that transformation of where the opportunities are to make money or not make money, and how that might trickle down to the consumers at large, the folks that might be buying the homes that we're financing, for example?
Sure. That's an all-encompassing question. So let's just dig into different angles of that. So there is this transformation of wealth globally. Frankly, I was a bit of a skeptic about what was going on in China, and I've spent a fair amount of time in Asia over the last 10 years. Incredible wealth being created in some of these countries: China, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Australia. Enormous amounts of wealth transformation. So there is a rotation going on. I think that there are some laggards and there's some countries that have benefited by all this. But let me just use a couple of specific examples. So and this is going to apply to the housing market. Some of you may have read about the Australian housing market, but the values in places like Sydney and Melbourne have just skyrocketed over the last decade. They never really had the GFC in 2008, the great financial crisis that we experienced in America. And so as a result, their prices of their homes just kept going up and up and up to the point where what you might call an average home, anywhere from $2 to $5 million now. And so you wonder about that bubble. Well, it was fueled by a lot of the Chinese capital that was investing in their mines and massive mining minerals in Australia, for instance. Chinese companies investing down there, bringing their people down there. They were buying their second and third homes, some of which just remained vacant, causing this spiraling inflation of prices. That bubble has yet to burst. It's tapering now, but it's yet to burst. So we've seen that global movement of money. Places like Seattle and Vancouver, Canada, enormous Asian wealth driving the price of real estate in those markets that have affected the affordability of those units. Toronto, Canada, another great example. If any of you have been to Toronto, dozens upon dozens of high-rise condominiums for sale, and most of the buyers are coming from Asia. The prices have skyrocketed, so instead of paying a bigger price, they're just shrinking the footprint of these units. They're now 600 feet, and people are still paying the same prices they might have purchased a 1,200-foot unit maybe 3 years ago. So that rotation is taking place. In the commercial and multifamily sector that I work in, it's been viewed as a safe haven for not only inflation, but also income. And while the prices have gone up and the cap rates have declined, which means the lower return, it's still viewed as a really great asset class. And so as a result, German capital, Australian capital, Asian capital are all flocking to the US. Now, it was down last year because of the pandemic, but that money is ready to roar again, investing here, which will keep our prices up. It's interesting to watch the 10-year Treasury, and Phil will probably get into that here in a little bit. But before I do, $17 trillion globally, trillion, that's a T, is experiencing negative interest rates. The German 10-year was -60. It's now -31. So it's risen. It's still negative, but it's risen as our 10-year Treasury has. Asian, Japan, massively negative interest rates. We actually were aware of an RBS, a residential mortgage-backed bond, selling in one of the Scandinavian countries, middle of the summer last year, at a negative interest rate. So you get a mortgage on your home, and it's at a negative interest rate. You owe less than you started with. It's unheard of, right? So we see that rotation maybe moving a bit now with inflationary expectations, but you think about almost 25-30% of the world economy at negative rates still, and
Yep.
it's baffling. So therefore, our 10-year Treasury, our 30-year Treasury is pretty attractive right now for a lot of these foreign investors.
Yeah, we could probably do this for about 5 hours, by the way. So to try to condense it is difficult. It's a challenging thing for me to sort of ask pointed questions. I just want to reiterate something that was just said here. Okay, I have $1. I would rather you give me 92 cents for that dollar, or whatever the negative rate is, folks, rather than just me take that dollar and put it in my mattress. That's what's happening in many countries. To put that into perspective, how insane that is. Or moreover, I'm going to pay you to buy a house and finance it with me. Really, really interesting. And you touch on where our 10-year is, around 133 when this call started, relative to -3.1. In Germany, something that someone would say is, well, boy, 160 odd basis point spread. How the heck could people be selling treasuries right now? That's a conversation, sort of in and of itself. One of the reasons why, I've been saying, from the rooftops for 2.5 decades, that rates are never, ever going to go up ever again. There'll be fluctuations and bumps along the way. So I want to touch on that for a second. One of the things that we talked about here mid Q2 was the sense that we were entering a bit of a perfect storm. There were early signs that COVID wasn't going to have the widespread effect on the economy that was once feared. There'd be pockets of winners and losers. Our sense was arguably more people would come out of this better, that inflation pressure that you touched on, but that, maybe the folks who came out of it worse would be really hurting. Folks in hospitality, restaurateurs, commercial, retail commercial space. So you have a slightly better economy than expected, but you have the Fed who's in it to win it, sort of acting like this is still doomsday. And so when you combine that with folks who maybe have more equity, want to invest that equity in their homes, staycation, that was one of the buzzwords that resonated with me. What sort of impact does the juxtaposition of all of that have on interest rates, on housing? And then further, in terms of what you do, that strength in the electronic commerce segment that has on warehouses, some commercial real estate, multifamily real estate. What is that all thrown into a pot what does that really do for the economy at large, or do to the economy at large, and specifically residential real estate?
Wow, another very complex
I
question.
told you this wasn't going to be easy.
Yeah, no, this is you're very good, Phil. There's a lot of different elements to this. So I do think we are seeing a reflation trade going on right now. You look at labor markets and the how tight many of them are. They're super tight in Colorado right now, for instance. You look at commodity prices. Copper hit a 10-year high this morning. Lumber is way up, and so
Crazy.
those reflations are going to impact the cost of housing, obviously, and I think they can create higher treasury rates and indexes that we use to price our mortgages. Now, the good news is that with that reflation and with the higher indexes, we're seeing spreads compact. So the price of the ultimate cost of the borrower isn't going up basis point for basis point. It's somewhat muted at this point. However, if there's a kind of a risk-off trade, in other words, investors are more fearful of what the economy holds in the next 2 or 3 years, those spreads can increase again. So I got out of the business of forecasting rates a long time ago. I remember when I started in the business, I'm coming up on my 40th year with the company, with CBRE. And when I started, prime interest rate was 16%, and I think we had a 17% 10-year treasury. And it's bounced around, but it's gone steadily down to the low point last year, and now it's up, roughly 100 basis points from the low point. So our economists at CBRE are saying that we're going to see a 10-year treasury by the end of the year somewhere 185 to 2, and I think that's pretty similar with what the MBA is saying as well. So it's hard to say. There's so many different factors. I do think we have some big social issues in the country, and this wealth gap that seems to be widening. I think that those social issues, and we saw some of this coming out at the election, can get very complex and could throw out surprises. And it's those surprises. Nobody saw COVID coming. It's those surprises that can throw us for a loop when it comes to predicting interest rates or forecasting virtually anything. I spent a good part of my early career in California. I was born and raised in Southern California, and the general consensus at the time was values in California only go one way, and that's up. Well, I've got a 29-year-old son now in California, and I'm telling him, who's renting, by the way, that given the social issues, the tax issues, the overall business environment, the ecological issues in California, that may not be the case forever. And by the way, when I sold and moved to Houston in '97, the value of our beautiful half-acre lot home in Scripps Ranch, San Diego, went down 20% from the year before. And so I think there's also an issue, and I'm kind of waxing on beyond your question here, but most people in our industry, whether it's commercial, multifamily, or single family, have never really seen a downturn. They saw that the hiccup from COVID last year, but you all had a record year, I'm sure. And most people in this industry that have been in it a decade or a dozen years have never seen the kind of downturn that I've seen, or you've seen. Perhaps you've probably only seen a couple. I've seen 5 or 6. But I think that, and this was part of my opening speech when I was put in the position of being chair in October of 19 in Austin for the MBA. I said one of 3 premises I talked about was agility. And I think for everybody on this call, you better be agile, because things will change, and those that succeed will change with it, and those that will fall out won't be successful at that change.
Interesting. So one of the things that you touched on that is a drum that I've been beating for a couple of years now, and in the wake of COVID, that it's sort of those pressures went away, but now they're coming back, which is margin compression, as well as cost to manufacture increasing, things of that nature. When you talk about a record year, and it was a great year for the industry, and certainly an unbelievable year for EPM and everyone that's here. We sort of set that up with some moves that we made as far back as 18, where we sold our servicing at the highs when everyone was calling for rates to push up. We felt that there was some things that were going to happen that was going to actually push rates down. And those two things were, from a mortgage standpoint, the overvalue of servicing and the underpricing of risk. Didn't see COVID as the catalyst, but saw an event. And then the other thing was student loan debt. So the mortgage thing happened about a year ago now, a little less than a year ago. The student loan thing is in the public eye right now, and that's you talk about those socials. It's not just financial, the social struggle of do we forgive, do we not forgive? I mean, heck, for those who don't have the debt and are paying for their children, like, well, they're going to want to stand in line and say, hey, give me back some of my money. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I just want to talk about margin compression here for a second. I don't know that it's something that we can put a heck of a lot of thought behind, but you jarred my thought on that. I find in our industry so often folks underprice the risk and overprice the asset, right? And I would venture to guess that that's really not all that uncommon or specific to our industry. What are your thoughts on that as far as commercial real estate's concerned, as far as residential real estate is concerned? Because I would argue, and this is not going to be a popular thought, and I will concede that, when we started talking about bailing out some of the large aggregators, Q2, frankly, I was a bit opposed to that because I think that we keep rewarding bad behavior, right? Our busts are happening bigger and more frequently. And I think it's just because we're trying to commoditize something that isn't as easy to commoditize as one would think. At the end of the day, repayment and duration are important factors to accurately pricing debt. So another grenade that I'm gonna throw, lob your way. I don't know that there was a concise thought or question there, but if you could sort of take all of those thoughts and return that salvo, fire away.
So let's go back in the history books a little bit, Phil. So in 2008, when the markets blew up, not only was a single family business negatively affected, but so was a commercial multifamily business. The single family business had all A loans, liar loans, you name it.
Negam,
you're more familiar with it than I am. But on the commercial multifamily side, we were underwriting future rents, for instance. We were doing loan to values that were in excess of 80%. And so as a result, a lot of fingers got burned. A lot of the big banks sold off portfolios en masse. And it was those second or third tier buyers that were reaping the profits 5 years later because they bought it cheap and they sold it at retail. So we saw a repricing of assets. Our volume was down in 2009, something like 80%. From prior year, maybe it was 2008, but 80% was a massive number, right? I would say in general, we kind of learned our lessons. So our average LTV, we did in the US 43 billion in volume last year, another 10 billion globally on top of that. And the average LTV was, loan to value. Maybe that's the same term you use.
Yep, we use it. We know LTV. We're good.
Loan to value was somewhere in the mid 60s. So the equity cushion in a commercial multifamily loan is a whole lot thicker than what I understand to be in a single family loan. We have debt funds and mortgage REITs that will go up the capital stack, we call it. Maybe they'll get to 80%, but there's a big equity cushion. So as a result, this downturn, what we've learned is that we really don't have delinquencies that have gone out of whack. In fact, in 2008 and 9, the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac delinquencies were about 1%. And the life insurance companies that make a lot of commercial loans were under 1%. So as opposed to when I got in the business in the early 80s, we had a big downturn in the late 80s, early 90s, and life company delinquencies hit 8%, 8%. So they've learned their lessons, and the bottom line is, and likewise so have the banks. And so we don't have the delinquencies or the massive losses or the fire sales going on now that we did during the last big downturn. And so as a result, I think that the pricing is still pretty tight because they're getting compensated for a relatively low risk. And I don't know if that same applies in the single family industry. I suspect there's some crossover there, but it's a great time to be a borrower. Let's face it, for any kind of product.
Unbelievable. So, okay, what you're talking about, if I really distill it down to its simplest terms, is an efficient market.
Yes.
And so folks, what that kind of means, you're looking for price discovery. An efficient market discovers price quicker, easier, and better with each iteration, right? So as our markets become more efficient, now I'm going to go back to something here, right? And this is sort of the basis for, if I just apply it to our company, our industry here for a second, because everybody interest rates, right? Why do we think that we're in this Goldilocks period, notwithstanding the 10-year? And I have to tell you, I'm not 100% on board with 2% 10s by the end of the year. I'll just throw that out there. We'll talk more about that on another call or a later date or whatever. But as the markets become more and more efficient with each iteration, with each boom, with each bust, and I want to, if you remind me, I want to talk about boom here for a second also. But as we become more efficient, an efficient market is less inflation friendly. And therefore why I don't think rates are ever going up again. We become more and more efficient. Information and automation are the enemy of price elasticity. So I'd like you to think about that for a second, right? And I'm just going to throw something else into the mix that's related but somewhat unrelated, which is, as we have this rotation in money, and specific to what you're doing, which is commercial multifamily and warehousing and such. So you're talking about wealth created more so through speculation, right? Rather than earned income, speculating in rents, things of that nature, and buying in locations where the next boom is going to be. You talk about a rotation out of the urban areas and to different states, different areas. All of those things have a very, dynamic impact on interest rates that aren't as simple as, well, the cost of this glass of club soda went up or down. How do the markets deal or continue to deal with even more efficiency and the combination of that efficiency and rotation?
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about efficiency. On one hand, I'm going to argue for efficiency, and then the other, I'm going to argue for inefficiency. So
okay,
in the commercial multifamily markets, again, I'll use some facts. We closed in the U.S. 2,100 transactions last year, ranging from 500,000 to over $1 billion. So big spread there. Over 367 different lenders. Okay, we closed business with. Now, the 80-20% rule applies. 80% of our business was with 20% of the lenders. But that speaks to a very inefficient market, right? And that we're taking a deal to market, and we're going to grind for the best borrower results because we're hired by the borrower, and to the detriment of those lenders. Now, on the other hand, those lenders need to make loans, and so it's got to be somewhat of a win-win there, right? So that speaks to the efficiency of the market, and that we're using our technology tools to enable us to target a certain group of lenders that are interested in a certain product type, in a certain geography, in a certain price range, in a certain deal structure, to accomplish all that. So again, I'm arguing both sides of the coin here, efficient versus inefficient markets. We get paid because the markets are inefficient. But the fact is that borrowers are getting great rates today because the markets are efficient.
Right.
And people like yourselves can find those deals for their single family loans.
Okay, so boy, this is a tough one right here. Okay, this is something that I've been sort of working against now for probably 2 decades. Next year will be 2 decades. 2002 is when I started thinking about this, right? And that, to your point, efficiency versus inefficiency. I don't want to get too in the weeds here. They're going to shut us off if I start talking about conspiracy theories, but I will touch on this. One, there is a conspiracy theorist out there, and there's some video you could watch about sort of what is called the Great Reset. Okay. So we have machines taking over. We have efficiencies that are created in the market. And we have a workforce that, generally speaking, is aging and is maybe, in certain sectors, overskilled and undereducated, in other sectors, overeducated and underskilled, right? I don't know that we have that convergence yet of overeducated and overskilled. Okay. And that's almost what you're kind of talking about there, where we have an efficient market that is also inefficient, right? How far away are we potentially from, whether you be talking about residential, commercial, making a car, right? Serving content. You have some folks that do it better than others, or they do video well and print poorly, or vice versa. How far away are we arguably from somebody getting it and saying, well, one lender is going to lend to everybody because they do everything right. They can lend the best rates or build the best houses or make the best club soda. Is that even possible? I know Amazon is sort of their ambition. They're endeavoring to be all things to all people. How far off are we potentially from one company in every industry being all things to all people?
Yeah, that's an interesting, almost Darwinian thought. That it's going to come down to the most fittest, right, that survives. And I personally don't see that, at least in my lifetime, or anybody perhaps on this call's lifetime. But I do think that there is this convergence of efficiency and fintech and being able to do things better, faster, cheaper, that we're all going to have to deal with. But that personal interaction, that personal relationship, whether it's in your business or the commercial multifamily business, I think is really important. We, through the pandemic, have all started working from home. We're doing this sort of thing. And I was on a very large call yesterday where Laszlo Bock, who is the former head of people, also known as HR for Google, was on the call. And he took them from 7,000 to 120,000 employees. He's got a different company now, but so he talked about a lot of this, and productivity really improved in the early stages of the pandemic. And now a lot of major companies are seeing that productivity fall off pretty dramatically. And what we're hearing and what we're seeing is that particularly the millennials and the younger generation are getting tired of working from their apartment kitchen counter with their roommate's dog in the background. They want that culture. They want that experience of going back to an office and being part of a team and learning that culture that is hard to translate in a video screen. And so that gets back to human relationships and human needs. And I do think that that will be important in this industry for generations to come. I don't think we'll ever get to that point of efficiency where one lender has all the bells and whistles and the best rate and the best proceeds and the best execution. And I just don't see that happening. Not to say that someday.
I agree. So now I was inching my way towards this ledge, right? And now I'm going to sort of bring it back for a second. Before I do that, I want to touch on something you said. You talked about millennials. I want to take it a step further and talk about Gen Z. We had at our exchange, we talked a lot about the different age demographics.
Yeah.
One of the things that is found about Gen Zers, which is going to be, I think they said 40% of the mortgage market here in the next couple of years, they want many of the things that you're talking about to be, have their results measured, that human interaction, that contact, that consistent feedback, to be ambitious. The so-called millennials have sort of gotten a bad rap, when you hear about them, lazy, entitled, so on and so forth. I'm not going to comment on whether or not I agree, disagree, that's true, that's not true. What I do want to say emphatically is whatever bad rap the millennials have gotten, the sort of early returns on Gen Zers are the opposite.
Yeah.
So I want to throw that out there.
Good distinction.
Yes. Now, getting back to the machines are taking over, I'm going to throw myself out this window, to the opportunity that I want to really look in the camera pointedly say to our primers is, because what you touched on, Brian, I think the saying was, if you build a better mousetrap, they'll beat a path to your door, something like that. You touched on being nimble way back when. Agile, I think, was actually the word. Okay. So if we are efficient as individuals, right? If we are nimble, if we figure out constantly trying to evolve, right? That efficiency that we're talking about in markets, everybody's blowing me up on text messages, clearing my screen. If we become more efficient as individuals at EPM here, if we become more efficient collectively, stay agile, stay nimble, that personal interaction, there is never going to be a substitution for that. The confidence that you have in someone, right, to help you drive that deal home, regardless of industry. A computer can never replace that. A robot can never replace that. Those are the things that we should be endeavoring to do each day, because that, for lack of a better word, fear, and I hate that word, but that fear that the Terminator is coming one day, that should be driving us to being a better person and a better EPM every single day, to build that better mousetrap, to be more agile, so that we're on the leading edge of that revolution, not caught in the wake of it. So I didn't want that to be lost on this discussion, is we're constantly building towards a better EPM for tomorrow. What we did yesterday, doesn't matter.
No.
Does not count. So I had a gentleman that used to work for me. Name was Pete Rosin. He worked for Tony Robbins in the past, and I mean, super guy. Motivate. I mean, he'd bounce off the walls when he'd come in. He used to say things are getting better every day in every way, and that's what we should sort of endeavor to be, is the best of ourselves every day, the best contribution we can make to EPM.
And when you do that, you have fun. You feel part of something greater. It's all the teamwork, and it's an environment that attracts people. They don't want to leave, and that's I couldn't have said it any better. When I started way back in the dark ages, we were doing about $1 billion a year and had a servicing portfolio of $3 billion. Well, we got a $250 billion portfolio of servicing now, and we're doing $53 billion globally. And I'm having the time of my life 40 years into it. And that's what you need to do. You're creating an environment where you're creating success for others, and you're letting them grow, and you're fertilizing them and showing sunlight on them by providing these tools, right? And so that's where the convergence of the technology and the people make a superpower.
And that is also a great tie-in to how this call got started, right? Eddie talked about your leadership and the influence you've had on him. And if I'm not mistaken, when Eddie was given the role of MORPAC chairman, I don't think he's ever been the chairman of a fundraising endeavor, right? a lot of that stuff he had never done before. And one of the things that we try to talk about here that you just touched on that I really want to emphasize is when you have the right person or right people, what their, and we also said, hey, it's about tomorrow, not about yesterday. What their resume is, doesn't matter, right? You know, you can't teach what's here. You can't teach what's here. You know, you could teach what's here. You could teach how to, do something specific, a specific discipline, right? But you can't replace the heart of a human. You can't replace the spirit with which they are going to endeavor forward. And the opportunity that you and the MBA gave Eddie, and the result that he provided you, and the gratitude that he always talks about. These folks gave me this chance, and you didn't do it because he raised funds elsewhere. You did it because you believed in the person that he was. Yeah. And that's what EPM is about: empowering people more. Empower the worst of the people. You're going to find the best person, put them in a position to succeed, wind them up, let them go. Even if they do that specific plan in the past, give tools, set them up for success, not fail, but let them go. So you have the brilliance of your lead with the brilliant heart and spirit ability of Eddie. That's what winning combinations are about.
That's right.
I'd love for you to talk about that for a second and talk about your 40 years of experience. I know we've really focused on the markets here. You know, that is way selling short what you bring to the table. So if we could just talk about how you've mentored folks in the past and how you've led teams and businesses, and some of the principles that you've lived by in those endeavors.
So I think some of this is best told in story form, and I'll try to be brief. But I was a kid growing up in Southern California, divorced parents, put myself through college working as a union clerk at the grocery store. Union benefits straightened out my teeth with orthodontia. I actually took a job right out of college working for free for a guy that had taught me catechism. It was like a one-man tenant rep broker. He had 5 single-family residential agents in the front of his shop in a strip center, and I'm in the back in a windowless office with him. And I realized after 4 months that I needed a broader exposure. So what did I do? I took off to Europe and drank beer for 4 months, right? But I found myself when I was there, and I came back and I was determined to get a job in commercial real estate somehow. And I applied. I had a swim teacher when I was a kid. My mom was a secretary at a high school, and this swim coach was another secretary, and she taught me how to swim. And networking found out that her son was actually managing a Coldwell Banker office in Denver. I'm in Southern California. Long story short, had a 6-month interview process, never received a return phone call from the 6 executive vice presidents I had an interview with in downtown LA, by the way. And they were testing tenacity. So I passed the tenacity test, and then I got 6 appointments and I got hired. I was one of 11 white males that were hired. Of the 11, 9 of them were trustafarians. You know what a trustafarian is? It's a term. No. These were trust fund kids.
Trust fund kids, yeah.
Okay. And so I'm driving my unair conditioned Honda, and they're driving a brand new Beamer, living in their brand new home they just bought in Bel Air, right? But I was learning the hard way, but it was a great experience. I'm one of 2 of the 11 that started 40 years ago that are still around. And my mentor at the time said, you're an idiot for going into mortgage banking because they want to hire you in leasing or they want to hire you in sales. And so I went into mortgage banking and I worked my tail off. I was rookie of the year. I had a wonderful success. I made 5 or 10 times as much as my father did in his peak earning year, as a 23-year-old, but I did it on my own, right? And I put myself through school. At the time, I went to night school getting my MBA at San Diego State. So I was driven, but I was also working smart and I was working hard. And along comes age 29. I'm now married a few years, ready to have kids. And I come down with a near fatal blood disease. And I went through 5 months of experimental chemo at Scripps Clinic in La Jolla. And that was another learning experience. I've been published in the New England Journal of Medicine twice. I'm the only surviving male out of that study. Okay, there were only 10 of us. But it was another crossroad where it was a learning experience. And so I was physically potentially going to check out. And I was also kind of at the peak of my career. And my boss at the time knew that that was a pretty challenging event. I had several people that wanted to start a company with me. Long story short, I went into leadership at age 31. And that was a huge transition from being a top producer to being a leader, but I needed to do it from my head. I needed to do it for my future. And one of my first lessons learned was that I had to eventually work out the guy that had hired me. And I had a coworker who was a professional baseball player in his earlier years who wanted to make the money I was making, but wasn't working hard. And he called in sick one day, and I was scrambling to give a speech at the Meridian Hotel on Coronado Island, and he was playing tennis. It was the end of his career because I couldn't trust him anymore. So these are all learning experiences that build upon themselves, right? When I started, the company had less than 1,000 employees. We have over 100,000 employees now. My division grosses more in gross revenue every year than the whole company did when I started. But stick with it, tenacity, learn by your mistakes, be genuine, be honest, push hard, and have fun. And don't take yourself too seriously. And those are all kind of the ingredients that I think have helped me along in this journey and the reason I'm still around.
Lost.
Did we lose everybody or just
I'm
me?
sorry, I think we lost Phil real quick. I
Okay.
guess your story was just so compelling he couldn't follow it.
I got on a soapbox here, but I thought it's
No,
important.
there he is. There he is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
You're back, Bill?
I'm back. Sorry about that.
All
No
right.
worries.
Yeah, I got I don't know, a glitch in the matrix. I got disconnected for a minute. I apologize. I heard most of that. I was only down for about 20 seconds.
Okay. Yeah.
I wanna just riff on that for a second. I know we're getting short on time. You've been incredibly generous with your time, and we really greatly appreciate it. I want to take this last 5 minutes to touch on something that you mentioned here, and it's a couple things, and then B, just give you the last minute or two to say whatever you want to say. You talked about early in your career and how your first job you took for no pay. And that sort of resonates with me because my first several steps in my career, most of my comp was on the come, as they call it. Not big guarantees, big salaries, things of that nature. You also talked about hard work. What that speaks to me about, and this has been, when we talked about millennials and the bad rap that workers nowadays get, I don't think it has anything to do with age. I found this across all age demographics. Folks aren't as willing to pay the price as they used to be, right? And I find that to kind of be highly problematic. I think that any successful person wants to be measured on their results and not on their resume or their potential. So I'd love to, kind of touch on, as a leader, how do you balance when you have folks working for you? How do you balance a group of individuals? Because not everyone's going to be a superstar. How do you balance the interplay between the folks that are, sort of living on their past or their potential versus and trying to maybe drag down the motivated ones? I think that there's an interesting dynamic that happens in the workplace today, more so than I found it did 20, 30 years ago, when just everybody was trying to get ahead. Everybody was trying to make ends meet. That so-called entitled group. And again, I don't think it's just one sector. How do you manage around that? For our managers on the call, and for that matter, even the folks that are side by side with some coworkers who just aren't willing to put in that effort, to make the sacrifice, to pay the price to get to the next level?
Yeah, that's also a very complex issue. Let me start by saying that I think culture matters. It's the culture that you've instilled in your team. You may have somebody that's shy and withdrawn that doesn't appear to be busting their pick, but they're an extraordinarily important part of that ecosystem of that team. And so you got to respect that, right? You might have an employee that works weird hours because of a personal situation. They're taking care of an elderly parent, or they have a handicapped child or something. You've got to respect that, but value the contributions in the culture that they bring to your team formation. There is no substitute for hard work. I think you can work smart. I see some people putting in long hours that aren't terribly productive. They're doing something that's not terribly efficient. And so I think you've got to be careful there too, as to how do you really discover that or manage to that. But it really all boils down to the culture that you've created and that you live by and that you exemplify. And if you're not personally living that in a genuine way, I think it's they're going to see right through it. So you, as a leader, have to be really careful and deliberate about how you do all this.
So my last words on this, and then I'll turn it over to you to close if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share. Culture matters tremendously to us here at EPM. It's really, Eddie is sort of the driving force behind wanting to have a destination that folks want to be. I'm actually going to write a piece here in the next couple of days on LinkedIn. I'll give away the title, which is sort of loosely, because we talk about work-life balance, and I really don't believe that in such a thing. It suggests that those two things are mutually exclusive, and they're not. So, why can't a good day at work be a great life day? Is sort of the name of the piece, and talk about the approach to those two things not being mutually exclusive. So when we talk about culture, the point that I want to get across from my side in closing is, as leaders, right? And then as folks who are part of a team, understand that you can't control what you can't control. And how other people view you really is more about you than it is about them. Control your actions. If you're on a team and you want to get to the next level, act as if. I know that that's sort of hokey and a coin phrase, but act as if you own the company. That's how you get to the next level, right? If you're a leader within an EPM, to me, these are words that you must live by. There's no such thing as a bad employee. You either made a bad hire, or you haven't given them the tools, or you haven't put them in the right job. It's up to you to figure that out, right? And I sure as heck hope that it wasn't that you didn't hire the right person. And so I think that the first job that we have each and every day is to be introspective. What can I do? One of the things that I just popped into my head when you were talking before, Brian, and this is not about politics, whether you loved him, didn't love him, but I think he's universally accepted as one of the greatest presidents we had, JFK. That sense of ask not what your country can do for you, right? That's a question that I ask every day, is what contribution can I make to EPM? Not what can EPM give to me? But I try, rest assured that every single day we're thinking about what the best we can be for our primers. So that being said, I'll leave you the floor. If you have any closing thoughts, anything that you want to throw out there, I thank you greatly for the time that you were so generous in giving us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. 1 hour doesn't do this any justice. We could have had 10. So thank you. And the floor is yours.
Well, listen, I'll be brief because I do have to get onto another call here, but I think we covered a lot. Thank you for the opportunity. It's great to meet you, Phil, and it's always a pleasure to have Eddie there as well. But I guess I would say, we've talked a lot about pretty much inward facing. We talked about the economy, and then we talked about inward facing team formation and culture and that, but don't lose your eye on the customer. It's the client, the customer that makes all of this happen. It makes us employable, creates profits and creates our companies. And so keep your eye on that ball. I know in the single family side that the demographics have shifted in the United States, and I think your firm in particular is doing a wonderful job with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's something that we need to really focus on. Another topic you're going to hear a lot about, and it's really becoming more prominent in the commercial multifamily business, is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And I think that you're going to hear more about that in the single family business as well, and how we focus on those aspects of the general business environment and our clients. So I won't belabor it any further. I've had a blast. Phil, you've been wonderful speaking with you, and this hour plus has gone by in a matter of minutes. So thank you.
I knew 100%. I knew I wasn't going to say anything else, but boy, if that's not a mic drop moment, right? The customer. I could not. What a close. Brilliant. I agree with you 1,000,000%. Nothing further should be said on this call.
All right. Well, best of success to all of you this year.
Brilliant. Thank
Okay.
you.
I can't
Take
even
care.
follow that. So thank you guys so much for everything. Appreciate your time. We know you're super busy, but great call today. We greatly appreciate it. This is being recorded, so we'll send it out and post it on LinkedIn. So everyone who couldn't be part of this today can actually take part in it and have a wealth of knowledge as well. So thank you again, and have a great weekend, everybody.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.